Privet Katila von Lingruski desu, and this is the weekly Russian Ukrainian War update for the week of November 6th through November 12th of 2023. We're going to begin on the Donetsk front, specifically in Avdiivka. Before we start that, though, I want to talk about the fronts. The Russian MOD kind of has its own. The way they separate the fronts is kind of retarded. So I kind of made my own thing. I don't know how the Ukrainians categorize these fronts, but the way the Russian MOD does, they have the Kupiansk front, the Liman front, the Donetsk front, the South Donetsk front, the Zaporozhye front, and the Kherson front, which is kind of a little bit haphazard, like the way they've divided it. Maybe that's just for, I don't know why they did that. It seems a bit clunky, but just seeing it from my perspective, how I will do it is that I call this from Kupiansk to Liman the Luhansk front. I call this the Bakhmut front from Seversk to Bakhmut, this area. The Donetsk front from Avdiivka, the north of Avdiivka, to the south of Marinka. I call from Ugledar to Kamyanska or Orivka here, the Zaporozhye front, even though parts of it aren't part of Zaporozhye. And then the Kherson front, which basically goes along the Dnieper River. I think that makes more sense in terms of like how, because the reason why I categorize these fronts the way they are as that is because they kind of feed into each other. They both have the same operational goal. While as, like, so for example, this area, they're trying to reach the Oskol River. So if they break through in the north, that really affects what happens in Liman. While as, same thing here, if the Ukrainians break through here, that would complicate this area, or the Ukrainians break through here. This goal is the same. They're trying to reach the Sea of Azov. So that's kind of why I break down the fronts like that. So we're going to go to the Donetsk front here. We're going to begin in Avdiivka, and because this is where, again, the purpose of this is to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk, there's basically battles along this entire front, but most of the battles are taking place in Avdiivka at the moment. So what happened this week? So the major thing that happened this week actually happened towards the end, and so we can't really talk about what actually happened just yet, because it kind of happened towards the end of the week. But this map hasn't shown it yet, but the Russians launched an offensive and, according to sources, captured the village of Stepova, this village right here. They launched an attack, and they basically they took this southern tree line. I don't know if they took this tree line, but this is basically what they're trying to secure is basically this tree line and the southern tree line right here, and take this village, because this is a jumping off point to continue their encirclement from the south. Now, a lot of people think they're going to go try to take Berdichi next. They don't really have to. They just have to keep basically going south. They have to take then this tree line and then try to attack and capture this kind of ravine area here. And because the main road is this road right here. They need to put this under fire control, direct fire control. This is another road that they need to put under fire control, and this obviously goes for the south. Now, there hasn't been really any movement in the south this week, but this Avdiivka operation is 2 to tango. In order to surround it, they need to advance from the south and the north. So, but the thing with Stepova is that the Ukrainians are counterattacking. So maybe the Russians lose all their positions, maybe not. But we do know that there was a geolocated footage, I think somewhere like around here or so, of there was a Ukrainian Bradley that was like shooting Russian positions here, and they were like, it was driving down this road, and the Russians were like here. So this map is conservative in terms of gains. They say they just captured this. More pro-Russian sources say they captured this entire thing. But the thing is that regardless if they capture all this or not, the Ukrainians can still counterattack, because this is the weakest the Russians will be in this position. If they want to recapture this and push them back to the rail line, the Ukrainians need a counterattack, which is what they're going to do. So we'll know by next week if the Russians manage to secure themselves in this area or not. But so yeah, the Battle of Stepova is continuing. This is, if they manage to secure it, this is one more step in advancing in encircling Avdiivka. This map also says they managed to make another small bridgehead here in the west. And basically, I think what their goal is to capture these two tree lines, this tree line, and this village, and basically have the front line have this little solid bridgehead, so that then they can continue operations to the south, and maybe like have a pinning operation in Berdichi as well. They don't need to take this per se, though I think they'll eventually take this because this is where they'll have the new kind of front line. They're hoping to push probably the Ukrainians back to kind of here probably. The Russians will be here, and this will be kind of like the gray zone and stuff. That's probably what they're hoping, but they don't necessarily have to take this Berdichid in order to encircle Avdiivka, if that makes sense. But they do need to take Stepova, so this village is essential for Russian operations. So yeah, that's the goal of the Russians, to try to secure these two tree lines right here, and this tree line, and then the village itself. But what this also shows is that the Russians have secured themselves along the rail line. They also managed to actually capture this dacha area. I don't know if I mentioned that last week, but this happened earlier this week. They captured more north, and they also took these areas here. And so, the Russians are moving more north here, and since they've been able to attack here, they basically have secured themselves along this rail line. The Ukrainians have put a bunch of forces in Avdiivka, so it's gonna, and that's why last week there was a lull in the fighting, because the Ukrainians were on the attack trying to dislodge the Russians from these positions on the rail line, but they obviously have not been able to do that. There's also an interesting position here, I believe, where the Russians were involved in this area, which is one of the most heavily fortified areas in Avdiivka, because this is part of the pre-war front line. So this area is probably getting captured by the Russians, or maybe that was just a recon in force and they didn't actually want to capture it. But there was a geolocated footage of Russians in this area. So the Russians are not advancing into Avdiivka itself because this is heavily fortified as hell. They're trying to take the fields around Avdiivka. But I think these are more like for pinning operations, to try to pin the Ukrainians down, because again, they could just take some units from who are defending all along this entire area and just move them to Stepova or move them to Serena, because the Russians need to, again, when you're on the defense, you don't need as much as when you're an attacker. And so the more defense you put, the more the attacker needs to put. But if the Russians are attacking here, then you can't move their troops, because if you weaken the defense line here, then they can actually take some places here. So that's Avdiivka, and that's kind of mostly for what's happened in the Donetsk front. The Russians are still attacking here, but there's been no progress to report this week in terms of that. Actually, another place that's actually been really interesting is the Bakhmut front, mostly in Bakhmut. There's been nothing in Servix, but in Bakhmut, the Russians are actually on the offensive again. Now, before I mentioned the Russians are on the offensive in the north, and that is true. We're going to talk about the north first, and the Russians basically are securing, they took these two new fields. They are moving along the rail lines. They're right now attacking to try to take this tree line. And basically what's happening in the north is that the Russians are pushing the Ukrainians back to their to where they were after Bakhmut fell. So what happened after Bakhmut fell and when the summer offensive started in June is that the Ukrainians wanted to recapture Bakhmut. And to do that, they wanted to basically do what the Russians did and encircle it on two sides. That's why they attacked in the south, and that's why they attacked in the north. The north was not successful at all. They failed to break through the Russian defenses here in Dubolo, Vasilka, and Zilizashnya here. However, then they also tried to break through here. In fact, they got so close that they actually managed to enter Berfika at one point. But basically, the front line was kind of, these two villages were key to unlocking the northern, just as Klitschevka and Andriivka were for the south. But they kind of failed in this area. They spurted out and they focused entirely on the south, where they had more progress. However, after they stopped doing that, the Russians went on the attack here, and they've been slowly advancing for at least the last 2 weeks. And now they've taken more land, and they are slowly pushing the Ukrainians back to Bogdanovka, Kromenova. There's a lot of defensive here that they built during the Battle of Bakhmut. there's this giant trench complex, I think somewhere here. They don't show it on this map, obviously, but there's a giant trench complex that's in this area here, because this was one of the last. This was like one of the big supply lines for the Ukrainians in Bakhmut. So the Russians are advancing in the north, and they're actually pushing the Ukrainians back and negating all the progress they had here, and basically ending any threat of encirclement from the north. I think that's basically. I don't know if they're trying to advance more, but from what Russian sources are saying, they're trying to flatten the front, which probably means that just go back to where the front line was after Bakhmut fell in May. This is actually happening in the south as well. So this is interesting because the Ukrainians have been on the attack in the south of Bakhmut for a while, and this is the first week in a while that the Russians actually are on the offensive. I actually don't know why how they've been able to do that, but the progress on this front is that now the Russians, a lot of Russian sources are saying the Russians have entered Klishevka and actually captured the village again. I think that's a bit overstating it. I think what happened is they entered maybe the northern part of Klishevka and took it, but the rest of the village is still maybe in the gray zone or under Ukrainian control. But what the Ukrainians do control is these hills on the north of Klishevka, which is actually kind of the essential part of Klishevka, which makes it very useful, because this is what you need to control the northern part. These are the heights in this area, and so once those heights were taken, that's when Klishevka fell. So it's not enough just to take Klishevka; they need to take these heights. But the Russians what happened was that the Ukrainians for the last month or so have been trying to break through the new Russian defense line along this rail line. They've been having some small successes, having taken some parts of the rail line, but not on other parts. But the Russians have launched an attack. They retook these rail lines on the north of Klishevka. In fact, and this is where they probably entered the north of Klishevka again in this area. In the south, they liquidated the Andriivka pocket. The Ukrainians tried to push through and occupy this area here, but the Russians liquidated this pocket, so the Ukrainians are back on the other side of the rail line. And so basically, the rail line, the Ukrainians have been trying to break through this rail line, and this week the Russians basically negated that progress, which was really bad for the Ukrainians, because they need to break through this rail line defense in order to continue their operations to cut the Bakhmut-Gorlivka highway and continue trying to encircle Bakhmut from the south. Now the Russians are, maybe they're in the northern part of Klishevka. Maybe they're trying to take Andriivka. This is probably, this is probably where Russian operations make, where I think their targets are a bit more clear. They probably want to retake Klishevka, Andriivka, and just have the front line be along this canal again. What they might want to do is perhaps, have this be, this is maybe a big ask, but maybe they would want to take Kromova, they want to take Bogdanovka, Ivanovka, and basically have a new, more straighter front line. And because there's also been Russian bombardments of Ukrainian positions in the front of Bakhmut, in areas like, on these fields in front of Ivanovska. So the Russians might be trying to flatten the front and probably just retake the land the Ukrainians took during their counteroffensive last summer, which would be a big blow for them. But for the Russians, even if they did that, basically it just basically secures Bakhmut. It doesn't really help them advance to Chasiv Yar, which would require more offensive. So we'll see if the Russians continue their progress to try to see if they could continue negating the gains that the Ukrainians made. But the biggest thing they need to focus on is Klishevka and taking the heights. But we'll have to see if they continue their progress that they made in this area this week. There's no changes on the Luhansk front. If we look at, we're going to go to the Kherson front. This is actually where the AFU have made more success. By that I mean most of the focus has been in Krinky. I always say there's this big battles going on here, but it's really only in this village. The Ukrainians are still in the center of the village. They actually managed to enter the forest right here, but there was an attack and a bunch of them got captured, but we don't know if they're still in that forest right in front of it. But the Ukrainians are still in this village, and a lot of Russian sources are saying the reason why they haven't been able to liquidate the pocket, this like bridgehead, is because of very strong Ukrainian drones and very strong Ukrainian electronic warfare, which negates Russian drones. So for some reason, what is usually a Russian strength is actually where the Ukrainians are strongest in this area. My theory is that this is actually a distracting operation. I think, like, even if they manage to hold on to Krinky, like, what exactly does this do? Like, what are they trying to do here? Like, what's the purpose? I think the main purpose is that to distract the Russians here and then launch a big offensive, probably maybe here near Novokhovka, or maybe here near Olishki, here near Kherson, or maybe on the Kirnburn Spit. This might, because this would unblock Nikolaev port if they take that back. But I think this is just a distracting operation, to be quite honest. And I think maybe the Russians know that. The Russians have been heavily bombing this area, despite the fact the Ukrainians have not attacked in this area yet. So maybe that they know the Ukrainians want to attack here, and this is just a distracting operation. Regardless, the Russians have not been able to stop them. They still have to pour more forces here, and regardless if the Ukrainians, this is actually their actual objective or this is just a distraction, it's working. So, but the Ukrainians haven't been the positions here have basically been the same for like 3 weeks. They've still held on, which is what makes the Ukrainians successful, but they haven't been managed to they haven't broken through here yet. But I think there's gonna be another crossing, in the next few weeks probably. But so it's interesting. Though this Battle of Krinky does show that Russian defenses here are not as strong as they are in other places. But so far, it's not critical for the Russians. It's stable, but it's could be better. On the Zaporozhye front, we're going to talk about another thing about Kherson is that maybe they're not actually trying to break through. Maybe it's to drag Russian troops there away from the Zaporozhye, because after the Battle of Krinky started, they restarted offensive operations in the Robotyne part of the section. And, again, it's the same thing we've seen for the last few weeks. I mean, during the months of the counteroffensive, is that, it takes a week for them to take a tree line. So this time, they say they took this tree line here. And they are basically trying to take this tree line. They're trying to attack this tree line, trying to secure the western part of Robotyne. The Russians are along this area here, and so it's and they also been there's been bombardments on this area of Verbov. It's very hard to determine where exactly they are. There's so many tree lines, there's so many farms, who is where and such. Where are the Russians? The Russians have control of Verbov entirely, but where are the Ukrainians? Where is the gray zone? It's very hard to determine here, but the Ukrainians are trying to press their luck, get closer to Verbov. They're trying to get closer to Kopany. Now, the purpose of so they took a field or two, a few meters. That's what's expected of this war, but no breakthrough again. And I don't think they're trying to make a breakthrough. I think if the Ukrainians are smart and they're not dumb, but they know they can't break through to Tokmak or this, let alone the Sea of Azov. So I think what they're trying to do is just secure this salient, because again the Russians are they could easily cut them off. So they were trying to secure this salient here by taking Verbova, Kopany, Novoprovka, and try to flatten the front line here. So it's not just a big salient that can be cut off. So, maybe that's what the whole Kherson operation was about. It was just to pin down drag Russian troops here and then attack here and make it easier to attack. Also, there was a Russian offensive near Ugledar. They actually managed a little bit north from Nivolska, this area here, this village here. They advanced north there. They've been trying to take, these fields. The purpose of this operation, I think, is to take what they call the coal mine, this coal mine right here, and because and basically try and capture Ugledar, because the reason why they couldn't capture Ugledar is because they advanced north. They occupy these dachas. They managed to be here, but then this area, Ukrainian reinforcements were able to get rushed through this highway. So I think they're trying to get closer to this coal mine and capture it. They advanced only a few hundred meters here, but that's probably the purpose of moving north from here. They're trying to get closer here so that maybe when they want to take Ugledar in the winter, they could attack, capture this, and then pin Ukrainian forces here as maybe another Russian offensive tries to take Ugledar in pincers. So the Russians are a little bit active in Ugledar. We'll see if this continues. Maybe this was just a small recon operation. Who knows? But again, the Russians would really like to take this town because this gives them the high ground overlooking this entire area. And along with battles in Novomikhailivka, I think what they're trying to do is, if these two places fall, this goes in tandem with maybe their offensive near Donetsk and Marinka. I think they're trying to push the Ukrainians just back to less favorable positions, try to push them maybe near Karakova, Usvensky, Velika Novosolka, kind of along this road here, as you can, if you follow my pointer. It's kind of like have this be the new front line, and then the Russians just take this blob and kind of flatten the front a little bit more as well. So that's probably what they're trying to aim to do. My thought also is that I think their main push is also going to be in Luhansk, because again, attacking two places might be better than one. That might sound contradictory, but if you attack only in one place, the enemy could just send their defenses there, and they might attack. I think their main strike is going to be in Luhansk, the Russians, for the winter, and then there's going to be secondary and offensive in Donetsk. And the hope is to reach the Oskol, and by the time the second year anniversary of this war comes along, they're hoping to take Ugledar, take Novomikhailivka, take Avdiivka, Krasnogorivka, these towns, these suburbs of Donetsk, and also reaching the Oskol River, which means taking Kupiansk and Liman. These are solid tactical goals. These might sound small, but that's the thing. There's not going to be a big Russian offensive that somehow overwhelms all of Ukraine. That's not going to happen until one side gives up through attrition, because this is a attrition static positional war, and that's what's going to be until one side gives up. And so the battle is basically who could attrition the other side more, and who can basically improve their tactical success on the battlefield. And reaching the Oskol, which makes this a much more better defensive position, and able to outflank the Ukrainians here near Slavansk. Pushing here to get Ukrainian artillery away from Donetsk, and pushing them to less fortified areas. Like, that helps the Russians tactically. It's not a war-winning move. It's not like, the capture of Ugledar is going to break the Ukrainians or taking up Avdiivka. It's these tactical attacks. And that's basically what we should expect. The same thing with the Ukrainians. I think the Ukrainians are now learning this. They're learning that it's not going to be a big breakthrough. So that's why they're just like, okay, every week we're going to try to capture a tree line to improve our positions near Zaporozhye and secure the gains we gained during the summer. And that such type of things. So that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like this video if you want to see more videos like this. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this as well, and comment what your thoughts, and share this video around. And I hope you guys enjoyed. So aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.